Hello, I'm Victoria Nagudi, and with me is Kenneth Dillon, a historian and scientific researcher. Today, we are going to be discussing the theory of the reversing Earth, which states that Earth is naturally vulnerable to 180-degree inversions, believe it or not. These can be caused by close approaches of gravitational bodies or other circumstances, which we will get into. The most recent inversions, according to Dillon, were the Bronze Age approaches of Venus, which caused catastrophes cataloged in ancient myths, religious texts, and artistic depictions. Now, notably, this draws upon the Venus theory of scholar Immanuel Velikovsky, or rather researcher Immanuel Velikovsky, propounded in his 1950 work Worlds in Collision, in which he argued that Venus emerged from Jupiter as a comet and passed by Earth every 52 years until its orbit stabilized. Um, so a little bit controversial. Ken has worked at a few of its inconsistencies to put forth a revised version that supports the theory of the reversing Earth, the revised Venus theory. Ken, could you elaborate a little bit on this?
The revised Venus theory starts with the perception that the biggest weakness, in a sense, of Velikovsky's theory was his notion that Venus had exploded out of Jupiter. And the various scientists found that really hard to believe. And so I came upon the myth to interpret and got to the point where it seemed to me a much simpler answer was that Venus had been pulled by Jupiter's gravity from the outer solar system, and in passing by Jupiter had heated up enormously from tidal friction. And I later found out that actually I had been preceded in 1978 by two researchers who had written about that in an obscure journal, unfortunately, and they were ignored. So once you have that explanation, then it starts to make the rest of the theory much more acceptable. And other parts of the revision that I've made to the theory include that I try to explain the features of Venus as we know them as a result of this passage of Jupiter. And those really remarkable features, the most outstanding one is the slow retrograde rotation of Venus, a major anomaly in the solar system. And you can see clearly that that could have come from tidal locking to Jupiter during the passage. And for the same reason, you see that Venus's atmosphere has super rotation. It rotates extremely fast. And you can see the rotation would have continued even as the body of the planet would have been held steady by the tidal locking. And the third aspect of Venus was that in ancient times, Venus was depicted as an ovoid. And so that was something that was clearly indicative of tidal locking. And other aspects of the revised theory include the dating that I've been able to identify 4 dates for the inversions that we'll talk about. And I've also found more support for the standard chronology against Velikovsky's foreshortened chronology. So that helps us fit it much better into the existing evidence and historical accounts.
So, relatedly, in terms of historical accounts, Herodotus wrote the Egyptian priest told him 4 times the sun rose contrary to his wont. Twice he rose where he now sets, and twice he set where he now rises. What would Velikovsky have made of this, or what did he make of this, if it was addressed?
Velikovsky very insightfully, and against a whole lot of tradition of very uninsightful views, he said this means that the Earth must have inverted 4 times. And then he proceeded to find evidence in ancient culture, and artifacts, in architecture, and so on, that supported the idea of an inverting Earth. For instance, he found that the Chinese zodiac was retrograde, and what had apparently happened was that at a certain point, the Chinese had stopped changing the constellations in the zodiac. They retained the animals, but after an inversion, and they just attached the animals to ears, giving us the modern Chinese zodiac. And he found other pieces of evidence, such as the ceiling of the famous Egyptian architect Senmut, the ceiling of his tomb, which has two panels. One seems to depict a retrograde world, retrograde skies, night skies, that show the stars in a kind of reverse position, whereas the other panel shows what we know as the heavens and the alignment of the stars. So, in other words, showing what the sky was like before an inversion and then after an inversion. So these are pieces of evidence that Velikovsky found. He found a good deal more too about it.
Interesting. So, I mean, obviously, there are many independent historical compatibilities, religious texts, artistic depictions, mythologies, and constructions. But some see these ancient depictions and descriptions as either too figurative or too fantastical, or maybe even too irrelevant to give any serious credence to. So, how do we address this? What should be taken at face value, and what should be examined with skepticism?
In general, it's the question of interpreting myths, but it can apply to some of the other things from ancient times too. And that is, I formulated that many myths are fanciful. Some myths convey important truths. And if you want a good example of that in regard to the inversions, you couldn't ask for a better example than the famous Chinese myth of Archer Yi, who with his vermilion bow shot down 9 of the hot suns in the sky that were heating everything, the people up too much, and left one sun left. But there was an alternative version of the myth, which was sequential. And in that one, you can see in a dramatic way the match between what the myth was saying and our scientific knowledge of what happens to the tail of a comet as it passes by the sun. That the tail is always blown away from the sun, and it's as if Archer Yi's bow, which was the twin tail of Venus, and we know that from Velikovsky, that the area behind this large planet, comet planet, was dark. Because the sun couldn't penetrate to it. And so the tail appeared as a kind of twin tail. And in Chinese terms, the bow, Archer Yi's bow, and Archer Yi kept changing his aim each day. He would shoot down a sun, so to speak, and the next day the sun would appear, a new sun would appear from a new angle as the Earth went through the 180 degrees. And this went on for 10 days. And on the 10th day, it settled in its place. So a dramatic example of an ancient myth that actually is very expressive, precisely expressive with modern science. And another example, if you wish, from ancient culture that is really important. By the way, Velikovsky wasn't aware of the Archer Yi, and he never commented, to my knowledge, about this next one, and that is in Egypt, the famous temple of Karnak was built with a long central passageway through it, and it was built facing across the Nile, the western rising sun in the period after the first inversion, and then later on in its history, perhaps 600 or 700 years later, pharaohs came along after another inversion, had moved the sun back to rising in the east. And in this new version, the pharaohs, several of them, built chapels and temples and lookouts to look the other way down this long corridor out to the east, to the southeast, to the rising sun in the southeast at the winter solstice. So a dramatic, again, example of the way ancient peoples responded to this very amazing phenomenon of the sun arising on one side of the heavens and then on another. By the way, Velikovsky correctly said that the true translation or understanding of the name that the Egyptians had for the sun rising in the west, they called it Re Horakhti. Horakhti means of the two horizons, meaning
Really?
Not just that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but something much more penetrating, and that is that the sun was the sun that could rise in either the east or the west.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So I guess, I mean, Velikovsky put together a lot of clues, but you're continuing to collect more that provide grounds for this. Huh. So I guess I'm thinking there actually are a lot of separate historical pieces that support this, but I'm wondering also what other evidence, theoretical or otherwise, you've used to kind of help you arrive at the idea that the Earth is prone to this phenomenon.
This problem was left by Velikovsky with sort of in passing. He said that this was caused by electromagnetic forces, the causation of the inversions. But that was picked up by someone who clearly respected Velikovsky very much, but differed with him about the cause of the inversions, and that was Peter Warlow, who was a British physicist. And he wrote a book called The Reversing Earth, in which he propounds a theory that the Earth was working with its ordinary spin and then came under torque, not such a large torque, but kind of a medium-sized torque from passing Venus. And as that happened, the spin of Earth dissociated itself from the body, and the body began to follow at a different angle, the torque. It responded to the torque, whereas the spin kept going in the same way. And therefore, the body gradually went through 180 degrees of inversion. It's called fast precession, technically speaking. And that was something that Peter Warlow argued probably only took a day or two. And he also had a theory that there was no such thing as a geomagnetic field. A geomagnetic reversal, that in fact the field would stay connected with the spin of the Earth, and therefore it was just going to follow that spin wherever it went. So if the body went to the other 180 degrees, then it would appear to have been a magnetic reversal. The problem with that was there was very little evidence from the Bronze Age, except a few Greek and Etruscan bases that seemed to fit that. And so I think a better explanation is that the geomagnetic field has a center in the Sea of Japan, and it's been that way for hundreds of millions of years, as we now know. So in fact, geomagnetic field was connected to the body of the Earth. And as the body would turn over, so would the geomagnetic field turn with it. And therefore, it would appear to us that there was no sign of it. So it was not connected, in other words, with the inversion phenomenon. They were two different phenomena. And of course, that strengthened actually Warlow's main argument, which was about the cause of the inversion. And I should say that he even had a physical model for it, which was the tippy top. The tippy top, you can buy it online, and if you give it a little spin, it will turn itself over, just as Warlow argued that the Earth did. That I think that if you go back to the great mass extinctions of prehistory, hundreds of millions of years before the Bronze Age, you can make a good argument that those were caused by approaches of Mars to Earth, that Mars' orbit had intersected with Earth's, and that Mars came very close, almost hit Earth repeatedly, and that was what that then caused Earth to have a rapid turnover, a rapid inversion in 1 or 2 days. You see, the problem with that is that didn't happen in the Bronze Age. Is that we know that the Chinese called these things, or they at least mentioned in their chronicles, the Chinese called these 10-day events, and you see with Archer E, it's a 10-day event. So a slower inversion than Warlow was saying, and that answers the objection that some critics have had of Velikovsky, saying if there was such an inversion, then it would have completely flooded the entire globe and destroyed practically everything. Well, in fact, that's what happened during the worst of the mass extinctions of prehistory. And that's what makes me think it was a fast inversion. But what happened during the Bronze Age was these 10-day inversions, and they still had definitely giant tsunamis and other phenomena, but they didn't have the completely devastating effects that the critics were arguing never happened. They didn't happen for a different reason.
So what should we expect from these inversions in the future? Should we be looking out our windows for the next one?
I don't think so. I think you'd be wasting a lot of time. I think this was not a very common thing for Jupiter to pull a planet into the inner solar system. And it was a very amazing thing that it happened, and that it happened at a time that there were human beings available to observe it and to respond to it. I think there are several ways of approaching it. One is to think, what was this world like for the people who underwent the inversion and then were in a reversed state for hundreds of years, typically 400 or 500 years during the Bronze and early Iron Ages. And what was it like? It was greater time of turmoil and of all of the disasters that occurred during the Bronze Age. These were the worst, these 4 occasions. According to Velikovsky, Venus was passing Earth every 52 years. And so every 52 years, there was a catastrophe of some sort. And we know what kinds of catastrophes there were. There were earthquakes, there were volcanic eruptions, and therefore a lot of dust and smoke in the air. There were giant floods, tsunamis, and droughts. It was really a time of catastrophe. And so these would have been the most dramatic of those 52-year cycling events, these 4. I think one of the basic things that happened was you would suddenly find yourself 10 days, after 10 days, in a new climate with different winds, and everything would have to be somehow revised and done it a different way to cope with that. And it's not surprising that they did a lot of calendar revision. One of the most interesting chapters in Velikovsky's book is on the revisions by the ancients of their calendars. So there were a number of things that went on, and those activities that people were engaged in, those things they had to respond to, are things that we might be able to research nowadays. For instance, if you think of the Gulf Stream and the parallel in the Pacific, those in an inverted state, those would be in the same geographical location, but they would be coming in the opposite direction. The Gulf Stream would be coming from the north. And so that must change some things in the vegetation and the climate in general, and maybe easier to pick out in the varves around lakes. So that's the kind of thing that could be investigated.
You know, I think we're in a reversal right now. That's what scientists are going to find in the future. I'm serious. So I guess I would just ask if you have anything else that the viewers should take away from this. What should we be doing and thinking and saying with all of this information?
I think one step is that that all the critics and the internet is full of criticism and publications and so on. Wikipedia couldn't be more critical, the article about Velikovsky. I think they're going to have to do a real revision, and they're going to have to stop aiming all of their attacks on the original theory of Velikovsky, and rather start to try to target the revised theory, which is more robust and more up to date and harder to denigrate. And to this point, this theory has been around now for maybe 10 years or so. There's not been, as far as I know, a single effort to do so. So they're going to have to, at some point, if they don't want to lose their credibility, they're going to have to recognize their understanding of what happened is out of date, and they've got to respond to this new reality if they want to retain their credibility. For ordinary people, well, Velikovsky's book, once you have some caveats, because he certainly made some mistakes. He was a pioneer. He's allowed to make mistakes as long as he's pointing us in the right direction. His book remains fascinating. He was an outstanding researcher, extremely diligent and extremely detailed in his ability to analyze one subject after another. So he was a gifted person. He tended to be a contrarian, and that got him into trouble. But if you take all those things into account, Velikovsky's book is certainly worth reading. And then there are other books. Peter Warlow's book is full of very interesting information of reversing Earth. And then you have my website, scienciapress.com. So there are places to find out more information about all of this.
All right, yeah, and we're going to post these titles in the sidebar as well as a link to the website if anyone's interested in getting to the source. Ken, should I wrap this up, or do you have anything else to add?
No, you can wrap it up.
All right, so we've explored how mathematical justifications for Earth's torque, concurring historical accounts across disparate civilizations, and the work of researchers like Velikovsky support the idea of a world that can turn upside down. This paints a picture of a vulnerable and unstable planet that, despite supporting life, is nevertheless bound to its celestial predicament. Remember not to forget the indifference of your solar system, folks. I'm Victoria Noguchi, and this is Kenneth Dillon of Scientia Press. Thank you.